Welcome to another episode of the Indiana Hoosiers Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Brown, flanked and joined, as always, by Jack Ankonly and Todd Golden. And fellas, we're back on another somewhat of a somber note. It wasn't a 25-point loss this time, but Indiana did fall to Northwestern, which I'll let you guys kind of break that down. But Northwestern's kind of always just one of those. They're pesky. They're tough at home. They don't really beat themselves. Well coached. But it is another loss to a team that I would think most people who are following and loving Indiana think they should probably win. So I guess we'll start there with you, Jack. It was kind of the tale of two halves. You made some excellent notes for me. Indiana gave up 54 points in the second half and lost by 9. I guess going into it, was that a game like, okay, like they've struggled a little bit here and there, but they got to get this one. And maybe in the first half it looked like they were going to, and then it just didn't happen for them in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point in the season, every game is very important for Indiana, especially, we'll get into their road ahead, which is very difficult. But kind of when you looked at this one, it was, all right, Northwestern, I think, was 11-7 going into it. It's an opponent that Indiana should be capable of beating. And, it looked pretty good there in the first half. It was kind of an ugly display of offense, really, from both teams, I thought, in the first half. But Indiana was still up by 6. I think Northwestern went like 9 minutes without making a shot, which, I know Todd wrote sort of how it could be debated if it was good Indiana defense or just bad Northwestern offense. I think it was a kind of a mix of both. And then, in the second half, just completely collapsed defensively. And I know Mike Woodson, he was frustrated because, basically saying a lot of the good stuff we were doing in the first half defensively, for whatever reason, they just stopped doing that in the second half. A lot of the same things that Northwestern was doing, Indiana wasn't covering it the same. And Northwestern ended up, I think, hitting 13 threes, which was a season high. And just a brutal second half for Indiana.
Well, Todd, I remember you drilling the point home about consistency. Got to be more consistent. Got to have a better, start to finish, and clearly that didn't happen. So, I mean, are you feeling like you have the formula right there? Maybe you should talk to Mike Woodson. Maybe you should give the halftime speech. I don't know, but it's like you said, you don't really know why the inconsistency is there, but clearly it was again.
Yeah, I don't think I need to be giving any halftime speeches. I would take issue with the fact that, Mike Woodson gave a halftime interview. He said he was happy with the defense in the first half. I wrote a column about it shortly after the game on Wednesday. Northwestern missed their last 12 shots the first half. When I went back and looked at all 12 of them, you can really only credit Indiana's defense on about 5 of them. I mean, Northwestern missed a lot of open looks. They got the same looks in the second half, and they didn't miss them. So, in a way, Indiana was consistent on Wednesday in the sense that they got lucky in the first half that Northwestern didn't really exploit those open shots that they got more so than they did. But in terms of the overall picture, inconsistency. I mean, they have a pretty good effort at Ohio State and an overtime win last Friday. In which they had to demonstrate some toughness. They gutted out a second half where they went with basically about a 6-man rotation and made it work and beat Ohio State at home, an Ohio State team that went over and beat Purdue a few days later. So it's in there for the Hoosiers, but it just isn't always there. I think they get a little bit too satisfied sometimes with very small victories, basically. Being up 6 at halftime against Northwestern was, the way I looked at it, I kind of called it fool's gold. I thought they had some issues there that needed to be solved. They weren't, and Northwestern hit them hard in the second half with a barrage of 3-point makes. So that's the problem. I mean, Indiana just doesn't, you never feel like a problem is ever entirely solved. It's kind of whack-a-mole in terms of what they do and don't do.
I think we've now heard the whack-a-mole reference a couple times. I don't know. That's probably not good if that keeps popping up, if that's going to continue to be an issue. Well, Indiana did get some help back, and I'm probably going to say his name wrong. I know I asked you guys how to say it last week, and I'm second guessing myself. Malik Renew, is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right, so he comes back from injury. I know Mike Woodson had talked about bringing him back and how big of a help he could be, and then in this one I don't know if he's much of a help. He only played 11 minutes, 0 for 6 from the floor. But you kind of expect guys to come back a little rusty and maybe not fit right in right away. But this is a guy that they're clearly going to need moving forward. I guess, Jack, just thoughts on his return. I mean, the limited minutes and obviously not a ton of production, but like good to get him back on the court for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana's going to need him this season if it wants to sort of turn things around and finish strong. But it was pretty clear he wasn't close to his normal self. I think Woodson said going into the game that he really wasn't able to practice much, and not even just practice, but get back into game shape. I think that was pretty clear. Just sort of, not that he's the quickest player to begin with, but just kind of looked a step or two slower than his usual self, was coming up short on a lot of, looks at the rim that he's usually extremely efficient with. Finished 0 for 6 in 11 minutes, like you mentioned. And, it's kind of a tough call. Like, I was thinking about it after the game. It's like, would you rather have, 70% or so Malik Renew for 11 minutes or gamble with some of the bench guys like Langdon Hatton or play smaller, guys that aren't as talented, kind of a tough choice that I don't necessarily envy Mike Woodson for. I think a lot of, some of the fan and media criticism after the game too was how Woodson went back to the two big lineup with Ballo and Renew. And, I think they played together 5 minutes in the first half and then like just over a minute in the second half. And Northwestern outscored them in both sequences. And, I'd argue that's probably also because Renew just wasn't right, not because it can't work with both of them. We've seen that it hasn't worked sometimes, but I think that was more of a product of just Renew not being his usual self. But yeah, Indiana's going to need him. Just clearly wasn't back to normal.
Todd, I wonder if you could. Is this part of where some of the inconsistency comes from? You think just the guys being hurt a little bit, different lineups, different starting fives out there, trying to figure out if playing the two bigs. I mean, where. Is that some of the explanation you think, or is it a deeper rooted problem?
It doesn't help, but I do think it's deeper rooted. I mean, it was going on last year as well, with various players that they put out there. I think the too big thing gets a little bit. I don't subscribe to that as much as some others do. Indiana, it makes it sound like they're putting Renew and Ballo in there like right next to each other in the lane. If you go back and look at when they're in the game together, they're pretty spread out. Renew is able to spread the floor. Ballo is the traditional center. I mean, I watched Maryland use a high-low last night to score, I think it was 64 paint points against Illinois. It can work. I know it's not analytically popular, but I think the bigger problem is less what lineup they're putting on the floor and what combination they're doing. And you just can't trust any one player to bring the same production in every game, other than maybe Ballo. I mean, Ballo has been pretty good about getting his double-double in each game. But it's a matter of the pieces around him that you just never know. I mean, Miles Rice can have a great offensive game and then not play a role in the next. Mackenzie Mbako had 20 points on Wednesday and didn't score 20 in the 4 previous games combined. So it's a lot of that. And Malik, he had to come back sometime. I mean, there's no perfect time to bring him back. Bringing him back to play the limited minutes he did at Northwestern, it was going to happen at some point. So the bigger issue from a consistency standpoint is it just doesn't seem like any player is able to establish a baseline in terms of what you can expect from them game to game, other than maybe Omar Ballo. And everybody else, it's kind of, sometimes they show up and many times they don't.
This question I think could be interesting. First of all, I'm going to ask it to you guys this way. Who is the most dependable player on the team? Before you give me the person, do you guys think he will give the same answer? Or is it really that much of a throw a dart at the board and it could be any one of these guys? I mean, Jack, we'll go to you first. who's your answer, and do you think Todd will say the same guy?
I actually don't think Todd will say the same guy because I think this answer looks bad based on what just happened. But I mean I would say it's Renew. Like before, he didn't play well at Northwestern, but if you take the season when he was available, he was by far the most consistent guy, I think. And if he can get back to that level, I think he will be. I mean, he was the guy that I think before he got hurt, I had the most confidence in. All right, we know he's going to get his 14 to 20 points, 6-7 rebounds, and shoot 60, 75% from the field. And also, but even saying that, he's not a perfect player either. He's, still gets into some foul trouble, but I mean, it kind of sounds silly saying him now after we just talked about how he wasn't great against Northwestern. But I think pre-injury and maybe projecting the rest of the season, assuming that he can get back to his normal self, I would say it's him.
And you hear the old cliche, availability isn't ability. So you don't hold the injury. I mean, a guy gets hurt, but like, that's being on the floor for your team. You don't let that factor in at all to the consistency or inconsistency, I guess maybe for him, just the fact that he missed some games there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that he went 0 for 6 is because he wasn't in shape, not because he's a inconsistent player. Like I don't think you'd have to look through the game log. There's not many games when he misses 6 shots in general. He's usually pretty dependable in that area, and it was shots he usually makes. It's not like he was stepping out and taking some low percentage shots. So I think it's just sort of a matter of getting him back, fully healthy.
All right, Todd, if you want to, go ahead and argue with your boy.
I'm not going to argue with it. I mean, he's right. When Renew is healthy, he is probably the most dependable player on both ends of the floor. From more of a recency bias standpoint, you have to say it's Ballo. I mean, he's giving Indiana a double-double every game. What bothers people about Ballo is that sometimes it looks like he isn't giving the effort that people want to see. I think that, yes, I see it sometimes too, but and I think Indiana needs to set him up correctly to succeed. He is best when he's getting the ball off of a pick and roll on the roll towards the rim. He needs to be going downhill. If Indiana's going to post him up there, that's where the too big thing can be a detrimental thing for the Hoosiers when they use Ballo as a post-up center. It's not what he is. He needs to be rolling to the rim, and when he is, he's pretty unstoppable. He's been valuable in terms of second chance buckets, and he's been really valuable on the defensive end. I mean, he is a rim protector, not as flashy as Khalil Ware was last year with the block shots, but he's a presence in there. The other night, Northwestern, I think it was when I was looking at those misses, they had the last one they had in the first half. One of Northwestern's guards pulled up at the elbow, and it was because he didn't want to go in the lane and challenge Ballo. So I think he's been best on in terms of consistency. I don't think anybody Renew, if he gets healthy and does what he was doing before, then yeah. But I don't think anybody else even comes close. Everybody else has been all over the place.
Khalil
Right.
Ware, man.
God, I mean, look what. Sorry to interrupt. I mean, look what we're doing. Like, I agree with you, Todd. When you're saying that the too big thing gets kind of overblown by fans, like we just said that we thought Renew and Ballo were the two most consistent.
So play him. Yeah.
Can you blame Woodson for trying it? I mean, and I also think it's like sometimes people can point to, oh, look at the scoring margin. Oh, it's when the two bigs are out there. Well, look, in the second half, they only played 1 minute together, and Indiana gave up 54 points because they couldn't guard the three. Like, it wasn't because Renew and Ballo were there together. And I'm also not saying that it's worked perfectly the times that they were out there, but I don't think it was the reason they lost to Northwestern at all. And
no, I don't think so.
When you're getting these inconsistent play, like I don't blame Woodson for trying it.
I mean, the thing that I don't like about the two bigs on the floor thing, from a perception standpoint, is that it ignores the fact that Renew goes out to the arc. He's not a good 3-point shooter. Let's be honest about that. But it's not it's not a twin tower scenario. They're not both hanging out in the lane at the same time. They're decent about spacing them on one side of the floor or the other two. And I will say that I think Renew's presence made Mbako better on Wednesday as well. Suddenly Mbako's driving the lane again, because I think he's the one player when they spread out, he kind of, he doesn't take advantage of this space that's being created to get to the rim. And whether that's on Mbako or the scheme, who knows? But I do think there's, I think the idea of playing a modern offense is a sound one. I mean, yeah, spread it out and create driving lanes and get shooters. I don't think there's anything. I'm not debating that, but I do think it can become a cudgel sometimes for the fan base to beat up on when sometimes there's facts that support it and sometimes there aren't.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about this. We'll take a look at the immediate future, then kind of finish out the second half of the pod with the big picture look and kind of where things are headed. I was just going to say real quick, Kel'el Ware having a little bit of a splash couple games here in the NBA recently. If you guys have been paying attention to that too, that dude's a freak show. I know he was giving some trouble to some of the stars of the NBA, so that's pretty cool to see from the IU fan base. But anyway, what I was going to say. Take an immediate look at the game against Maryland on Sunday, and then we'll take a bigger picture look over the course of the next 7 games and the rest of the season. But Jack, you wrote down here on our notes, they're probably going to have to do the two. You guys just talked a lot about the too big thing, and they're probably going to have to go that route against Maryland. I guess, why do you think that? Why is that the approach, and can it work? Can it start to figure out? Can it look better? Can it look smoother? Can they get wins with those two bigs on the floor?
Right. So I think when I was kind of thinking about the matchup after the Northwestern game, and I was like, well, could Indiana, play the smaller lineups and try to flip it on Maryland, where you're making these big guys try to guard Mackenzie Mbako and Goody on the perimeter, and could you try to flip the advantage that way? But then I was watching the Maryland-Illinois game last night, and Illinois was shorthanded. They didn't have Ivisic, their center, and had to play smaller than normal and just got completely dominated. Reese had 27 and 17, Queen had 25 and 6. So, I'm not saying that. I think it's going to have to be kind of a combination for Woodson in terms of, I don't expect him to play Renew and Ballo together for 35 minutes at the same time, but I think he'll kind of go back to what he was doing earlier in the season when they'd play 15, 20 minutes together, because, Mackenzie Mbako and Luke Goody are not particularly strong defenders in terms of guarding opposing bigs. They both have decent size, but they're not particularly strong inside. So I think that's kind of the matchup to look at is who wins the battle of the bigs per se. Because those guys on Maryland were super impressive last night, I thought.
So what do you think, Todd?
Ever. I watched that game too, and Derek Queen and Julian Reese looked like it was old school. They were just Illinois had the flu bug too, so some of the players they did play were sick, and no mercy from the Terps. They went out and absolutely attacked the rim. I think I already said it. I think they had 64 points in the paint. And it was all downhill, pick and roll, high-low stuff, and it was pretty devastating. And it probably isn't something that's going to be repeated to that degree against Indiana. Hoosiers better hope it isn't because of the matchup. But what I think shouldn't be lost, though, is one of Maryland's most impactful players is their guard Jacoby Gillespie, and he kind of took a back seat last night for good reason, because they had the edge in the paint. But he is normally the guy who takes the most amount of shots for Maryland, or their second most, I forget which. But so he's a big factor in terms of what they do, and he's a huge factor in terms of what they do defensively. He's close to 2 steals a game, and Indiana was turnover prone the other night against Northwestern, and if they do that against Maryland, it's going to be a long afternoon on Sunday, because Maryland will take advantage of that.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go. I mean, you got Maryland riding high. Full strength or not, you go into Illinois' house and beat them by 21. Like that's saying something. And Indiana, this 9-point loss at Northwestern. So Todd, I mean, what is a realistic expectation for Sunday's matchup? It's at home for Indiana. You just talked about Renew coming back, getting healthier. Maybe he'll look a little bit better. The two bigs are still trying to find that chemistry, and it sounds like that's going to be the approach based on how Maryland just handled Illinois. Like what's realistic for Sunday? What should you expect?
I expect a win from Indiana. I really do. Having said all that, I mean, Maryland's got to figure out a way to match Indiana too. I mean, we'll see what Derek Queen, who looked really good and has been very good for Maryland this year, an Indiana recruit that many people remember Indiana not getting. But what the matchup with him and Ballo fascinates me because Ballo's experienced, Queen is extremely skilled. Queen reminded me watching him last night. It's like if you put Ballo and Malik Renew in a fly machine, and that's what you'd come up with would be Derek. And in a good way. I mean, he was really good, very skilled, bigger than Renew, not as big as Ballo, but I'll be curious to see how Ballo takes the challenge of making him work on Sunday. Julian Reese was very good last night. He hasn't been as productive over the course of the season. Not that obviously he proved he can be, but Maryland has to be able to handle Indiana's guards. And if Indiana's guards can play to baseline or better, I think it will push Maryland because up until Thursday night, Maryland had not won on the road all year, including losing up at Washington. That's Washington's only Big Ten win. Now, most of their games have been close on the road, but Indiana has to take the attitude that, this is our place. These guys can be had. Are they mentally strong enough to win a fight? Is Indiana mentally strong enough to win a fight? We'll see. But Indiana has to have it. I mean, we'll probably go into their schedule later on in the podcast, but this is a home game they have to have. And if they don't get it, they're going to be in trouble. So the urgency that is needed to win this game needs to be there. And that's something I worry about. I think Indiana can win. I think Indiana should win. If I'm worried about something Indiana doesn't have, it's they don't always approach these situations with the urgency they should. So hopefully they do.
Jack, are you in lockstep? Is this a win for the Hoosiers, or is this going to be another how does this happen type of thing at the end of the day?
Well, I guess it's hard for me to say that I expect them to win because we've just droned on about how inconsistent they are. So at this point, nothing would really surprise me. But Todd was I agree with a lot of what he said. There's no reason that Indiana can't win this game. I think they have the big guys to offset some of Maryland's strengths. As Todd mentioned, Maryland, I think I saw a stat going around on Twitter the other night that before the Illinois game, they were like 4-20 under Kevin Willard in Big Ten road games, which was like the second lowest winning percentage in the last 3 seasons. So they've historically not been a good road team. And you got to think maybe after playing very well at Illinois, there's got to be some type of regression. It's a game that Indiana is super desperate to win. They're right squarely on the bubble. I think Lenardi had them first 4 out today. Mm-hmm. So they have to have every home game essentially from this point on. So like Todd said, you'd like to see some more urgency for them. Interested to see how Indiana guards Gillespie, like Todd mentioned, whether if they go with Rice or maybe Trey Galloway, who's I think is a little bit of a better defender. So it's one that Indiana has to go in determined to win and to put that 40-minute game together, which they've been searching for.
I was trying to find the spread. We're too far out, so I don't know what Vegas thinks yet. But, yeah, we'll see how that one turns out. It looks like it could be pretty close. I mean, based on just some preliminary numbers and some of the things you guys have talked about, both teams have some matchup things to think about and worry about. So, with that being said, Jack, you broke it down into the next 7-game stretch. So you've got Maryland at home, this is kind of a lot, but I'm going to list them all. Maryland at home, at Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, UCLA, and Purdue all at home. So long home stretch here. That's, I think, why you listed 7, because there's a tough one at Purdue and then a lot of home games.
Well, some of those are away.
Are they away? Okay. I'm sorry. They weren't listed as away.
Yeah.
My bad. Wisconsin and Michigan State are both away.
Okay. So either way, 7-game stretch
Right.
broken down here. Some really tough ones on the road. Then I mean, you've got Purdue listed there, Michigan State there. I mean, those are tough. How many can they get out of the next 7? They're sitting at 14 wins. I was talking to you guys before this. That 20-win mark is always sitting out there for college basketball teams. Like, if you don't have a ton of quad 1 wins and you don't get to 20, like, you're probably not making the tournament. But if you get to 20 and they can snag a couple of these tough ones over the next 7, they're probably going to be on the other side of that bubble from Lenardi. So, like, it's getting to be crunch time here. What's the next 7 look like for you, Jack?
Yeah, so 5 of those are ranked teams. Obviously, 2 of them are Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State are both ranked. I think 3 is fairly realistic. 3 out of the next, so you go 3 and 4. I think you can beat Maryland at home. UCLA at home is certainly winnable, and then Indiana hasn't won in decades at Wisconsin, so that one's kind of that's sort of just been their house of horrors. But home against Michigan. Michigan is kind of an interesting team this year. I don't totally know what to make out of them. They just got ranked. I think 3 is realistic. I mean, 4 is you got to get an upset in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if 3 gets it done in terms of, because the big problem with Indiana at this point of the season is, I mean, I think we keep saying 14-6, 5-4. You look at that and you're like, all right, that's
not bad.
That's pretty solid. They're 6th or something in the Big Ten, but you look at it deeper and they don't have a win over a surefire NCAA tournament team at this point. Ohio State and Penn State, I think, are their 2 quad 1 wins, and neither of those teams are locks for the tournament at this point. So it's sort of not even just about piling up the quantity of wins, but Indiana's got to get 1 or 2 like marquee type of wins, and maybe that comes against home against Purdue. I think they're tough, but they're not quite as dominant as they've been the last couple of years with Edey. I think Indiana needs at least 3 in this next stretch, and I don't know if they can do more than that.
Todd, why is it that 17-10 just sounds ugly? It's not like Jack just said, like, you look at the record, you're like, that's not too bad. You get a couple nice wins here, maybe you pull an upset and think, but like, I don't know, 17-10 just doesn't look very good when you write it down or on paper. And again, that 20 win mark is still 3 games away at that point, with I think they'll have 4 games left after this 7-game stretch we just rattled off. So yeah, crunch time is definitely where we're at. I
mean, when it comes to these 7 games, I wrote, I do a weekly thing on the bracketology, which has been interesting because, I even sort of made light of it in the lead to the story I wrote. It's like Indiana's journey with bracketology over January has been basically to stay in place just enough to give the optimists hope and just enough to make the pessimists wonder why the hell we keep writing that story. I mean, they're still there. I mean, I agree with Jack. I think 3 is realistic. I think they could beat Maryland. UCLA has not been a good road team, and they've been inconsistent. You need to beat them in Bloomington. The 3rd win would have to be the home game against either Purdue or Michigan. I don't think they beat both of them. I think they're capable of beating either one of them. Michigan's been a little bit more vulnerable lately. They lost up at Minnesota. Time with Northwestern on Sunday. But Michigan creates some interesting matchup problems, and that game is going to be a circus because of Dusty May's return to Bloomington. And Purdue, I think Purdue is a better team than Indiana, but Purdue has shown vulnerabilities this year, including on Tuesday when they blew a big lead at home to get beat by Ohio State. So, the way I put it in the bracketology story, if Indiana goes 4-3 in the 7-game stretch, they're in the NCAA tournament because you're going to get quality wins, enough quality wins there to put them over the top. You go 2-5 or worse, and they're probably out. So what they're probably going to do is go 3-4 to keep the ambiguity going, because that's what the team does. So, but that 3rd win is not going to be easy. I mean, they're more likely, if I'm being honest, to go 2-5 than they are 4-3. So that's the challenge they have. The road games, I don't think they win any of the road games. If they get one of the road games, that would be a major surprise. Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan State. Michigan State's been solid this year. As Jack mentioned, Indiana hasn't won at Wisconsin. has never won at the Kohl Center. That's how long it's been. UW
Wow.
Field is where they last won at. And Purdue on the road, that's a bit. They won there a couple years ago, but that's a big ask. So you got to get those home ones, and we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be 3-4 at best.
What's that all about? Haven't won at the Kohl Center since it's been named the Kohl. I didn't know that. I've never heard that. That's how long is that then? When is the last time?
Indiana won. It was in 1998, I think it was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Indiana, and Wisconsin. That's coincides with when they turn the corner.
They've been good.
Yeah,
Yeah, they've been very good. But that's to not even get one, just steal one somewhere in there. That's a wild stat.
There's been a couple. I think Jack maybe would remember this better than I would. There's been some overtime losses up there in Madison and some blowouts. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and it was the other way around when I was growing up. Indiana did not win at Assembly Hall, I think, from 77 to 2002. So yeah, it's a weird series.
That is a weird series.
There's always, it feels like there's always something weird that happens up there. Like last year, I think was the game that CJ Gunn got ejected, and there was just a bunch of, they give up 91 points. I think it was another one maybe when they gave up a ton in the second half. They lost a double overtime game there. I think that might have been Archie Miller's last season. I was going to say that was Woodson's first, but I think it was actually under Archie. And then I think Woodson's first trip up there, they lost a close one too. So it's not even that. I mean, Wisconsin has been a very consistently good program, but they haven't been the class of the Big Ten necessarily. It just always, for whatever reason, just kind of been Indiana's weakness.
So they are currently 10-1 at home. I mean, so they hold serve there for sure. You mentioned Michigan State; they're 10-0 at home. Purdue was 9-1 at home. So these are some.
Yeah, that's part of it too. It's tough to win in the Big Ten on the road.
No doubt about it.
The way these games follow too. I mean, they play at Purdue a week from today, next Friday, and then they go to Wisconsin the Tuesday after that. That's a tough swing, And I mean, it would be tough no matter what the gap would be between the games, but that doesn't help, especially if somebody gets dinged up. So it's going to be challenging. And, this team is going to have to show some gumption that, frankly, they haven't really shown this year.
So just in kind of hearing what both of you guys said through this next 7 games, Todd's leaning, saying maybe 2-5 might be most likely, 3-4 certainly possible. 4-3 would be outstanding. Maybe it means winning, probably one of these tough road games. So Jack, how big of what are we looking at when you talk about the emotions, the swing, the vibe of the team? If you've got 2-5 versus 4, like how different is 2-5 versus 4-3 over these next 7?
Yeah, I mean, I do think Todd is right saying that you can probably feel very good about Indiana's NCAA tournament hopes if they get four wins in the next 7, because that implies that you get one of those, or I guess you could just win all the home games, but that would still be getting wins against Purdue and Michigan, which would be huge for the resume. But if you drop one of those, then it means you get one of those road wins. So I think for all the negativity and all the downside that there's been around the team this year, just from the fan base and everything, they can kind of turn it around. Like Luke Goody said the other week, see what it's like when we turn this thing around. But if they go 2-5, you're probably also not technically out of it, because you'd still have four games in the Big Ten tournament. But at that point, it would become really, really tough, and you'd need to, maybe win 3 or 4 of your final 4 and win a couple games in the Big Ten tournament. I think the key for Indiana is sort of, it's a cliche to say take it one game at a time, but I think when you kind of look on like social media and fans, it's like when they lose, the sky's falling, get rid of everyone, the season's over. And then when they win, it's like, oh, it's kind of been less to this extent, but there's excitement. Oh, can they turn it around? Indiana can have those emotional swings within, and I'm not saying that to imply that I know that they do, but you can't look at, we're talking about the next 7. They just got to talk about beat Maryland at home on Sunday.
That's it's funny that you go there. That's exactly what I was going to ask you, Todd, to kind of close this out. I've heard you guys say that you guys are around him every day, and in person with his press conferences, and hear how he talks to his team, and things like that. I'm curious what you would say. What do you think Mike Woodson's message is to the guys? Because coaches always say that, like you said, Jack, very cliche, one game at a time. Just don't get too far ahead of yourself. But when you get to this part of the season, you have to think a little bit about quarters. You think about the season in quarters or whatever it is. Like, we've got to get 3. If we go 2 and 5, that's probably it, or maybe it's not. Like, how does Mike Woodson handle this? How does he talk to his team? Is he a super tight-lipped coach speak guy to his own team? Like, how do you think these things are being internalized by the program, especially when you're talking about some of the inconsistencies? Like, how does he get his guys to now get up to go 4 and 3 over these next 7?
Well, the one game at a time thing is a cliche as far as we're concerned. In terms of, they're the ones who actually have to do the job. It is not a cliche in terms of the people who actually have to go out and do the work. So, yeah, they shouldn't be thinking about this as a 7-game chunk. That's for us to bandy about, and the fans. So the one game at a time, it's essential. They have to approach it that way, because if you try to look at this as a 7-game mission, it's overwhelming, and guys will get tight. If something goes wrong, if you start poorly, you put pressure on yourself. I actually think Woodson, we're not around practice, where the media is not able to attend practices at IU, but I think Woodson actually probably does do a relatively decent job of keeping his players, I don't know about on task, but in terms of Woodson himself is not going to think of it in a 7-game chunk. So, he probably embodies the one game at a time thing in good and bad ways. So that's the only approach you can really take as a coach. I mean, you have to attack these things one-on-one. I mean, the one thing that's weird about this stretch, I will say, that changes the dynamic a little bit, is a lot of the first 6 of these games come in pretty quick succession. And then there's a 9-game gap between the UCLA home game and the Purdue home game. That's their Big Ten off week. So there will be time at that point, but by that point, we'll know whether they're in a position where they can do something or whether they can't. What I don't think Woodson, and this is, I shouldn't say this, I don't know, but Woodson decides to deal with the outside stuff by basically, barely acknowledging it or criticizing it. He said, I covered the Ohio State game last week, and he said the outside noise was ridiculous, which, I don't blame him for feeling that way. Why wouldn't he feel that way? Whether he is understanding what the outside noise impact is on his players or not, I don't know. And I hope he is not just ignoring it from their point of view, because they're getting hit. Mike Woodson is an older man. He's much older. I'm in my early 50s. He's up in his mid 60s. Mike Woodson doesn't deal with people adding him on X or hitting Instagram and stuff like that. These players do, and that's why the crap that they have to put up with when things aren't going well from fans, is pretty intolerable. I hope Mike Woodson understands that that's what these players deal with when things aren't going well. And there's only so much you can do about it, but that's what I wonder about, is whether there's a generation gap of sorts in terms of, it's not just getting booed in the arena. That's probably the least of some of these players' worries. It's the stuff that you get when you're on your phone, when you're trying to go to sleep at night, that can be rough. So hopefully, that's being managed internally, that somebody's in charge of kind of dealing with that, because that's what I worry about. If things start to go wrong, and it's already happening, but it can get pretty nasty, and that's something that needs to be managed internally, and we'll see if they're able to do that. We'll see if they get put in that position in the first place. But that's one thing that I would be concerned about, is that, circling the wagons isn't always enough. You got to help these guys out in terms of their confidence and understanding that, these types of things do affect confidence. Fans will say they shouldn't, but go put go walk
Yeah.
them out in their shoes. I mean, it's not easy. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating stretch of games.
So Mike Woodson not doing it for the gram per Todd Golden. Got it. Okay. I'm gonna put you guys. This is how I'm gonna end the show for the next couple times we do it. I just made this up in my head right now. We're just a quick. You can give as much as you want. It only needs a one-word answer. So Jack, it's January 24th. Indiana Hoosiers basketball tournament team. Yes or no?
I'm gonna say no right now.
Todd?
What tournament?
I'm talking about the
NIT
about the big one, the NCAA tournament.
CIT or what? No, I think right now you'd have to say it's going to be an uphill climb.
Okay.
I mean, they need, and even after this 7-game stretch, there's a couple winnable games, and then they go out to the West Coast for a couple games, and those are rife with issues. Apart from the fact that Oregon, in particular, is a good team, but so yeah, I think it's going to be an uphill struggle. I think it can be done, but they're going to have to show more than what they've shown so far.
There you go. Well, we'll see if you guys are singing a completely different tune or if it's a much easier one-word answer here in another week. He's Jack. He's Todd. I'm Brandon. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will be back in about a week to talk more Indiana Hoosiers basketball and see if if they've started to navigate this 7-game stretch in a good way or a bad way. Thanks, everybody.